I don't know if you looked in your bulletin or not, but the theme that I chose was the untamable tongue. And you'll notice there's a picture of a guy with a zipper on his mouth. I've needed that many times in my lifetime. You know, one of the prayers that I pray a lot of times when I witness to people, a lot of times before I start witnessing, I'll pray that I know what to say and what not to say, when to speak and when not to speak. Because people who know me know that I like to talk. I love to witness especially. And sometimes in that witness I can say things that maybe I shouldn't say at the time. Maybe people aren't ready to hear it. You know, Jesus in his ministry said, there are many things I have to tell you, but some of them they weren't ready to hear at the time that he was there. So sometimes a timely message might be timely for one, but not another. The untamable tongue. I want to show you a few facts about the tongue, but before I do, I don't know if you knew this or not, but you know, I think most of us growing up, did your parents ever teach you that it was rude to stick your tongue out at somebody? You know, somebody makes you mad when you were a kid, you'd stick your tongue out at them. And it was just kind of a way of being mean. But I don't know if you realize it, but in Tibet, when you stick your tongue out, it's a greeting. You greet someone that way. So Mary, the next time I stick my tongue out at you, I'm just greeting you. And when you do that to me, I'll accept it that way as well. But isn't that interesting how in some cultures, something that means one thing here can mean something totally different somewhere else? And I'll just share a few. The Bible talks about the tongue in many places, but I want to show you a few facts that you probably knew about this little member in your mouth, and maybe some things you didn't know. I think all of us are well aware on the PowerPoint there, interesting facts about the tongue, that our taste buds are on the tongue, and we can taste things like sweet and bitter and sour and salty. And there are some myths about the tongue as well. It's funny that the latest studies show that the different parts of the tongue, we've always been taught, sense different tastes. Now doctors are saying that's not true. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But some doctors and some professionals say, well, no, it's not the different parts of the tongue. The tongue in general can do these things. Well, how many taste buds are on your tongue? I thought this was interesting. Approximately 10,000 taste buds. 8,000 are on our tongues. We have 10,000 total. There's 8,000 taste buds approximately on your tongue. And 2,000 are found inside of our cheeks, on our lips, on the roof of our mouth, and even under our tongue. I never knew that. I thought it all came from the tongue. Now, I will share this, and I hope Dad doesn't mind me sharing this. You know, we all here that know him know that he had been diagnosed with a form of throat cancer, and they did some radiation, and he lost his taste. Are you getting that back? You're starting to get it back? Too much. And getting it back too much. See, the untamable tongue, that taste. I love to eat too, so I understand that completely. The untamable tongue. I love to eat. But it's interesting that when they radiated his throat, that I guess because the taste buds are related to the mouth, you lost your taste. And he's starting to get it back. So here's another interesting fact about the tongue. Each individual taste bud has about 15 receptacles that are responsible for carrying the taste signals to our brain. So wow, 15 times 8,000. Think about that. All these little receptacles that are responsible for doing that. We're really marvelously created when we were made. Another fact, the only muscle in the human body, the tongue is the only muscle that works without any support from the skeleton. I never thought about that until I was reading the facts about the tongue. But there's no skeletal structure there. I thought that was pretty interesting. The tongue has an imprint much like a fingerprint. Every tongue has a different print. They all are different. They're very unique. And it really shows the diversity in which God made us. Everybody's a little bit different. Our fingerprints are different. Our tongues are different. And it's amazing to me that all of these things make us unique beings, and that God can love that unique person individually. It's a beautiful thing. And one last thing I'll share with you, an interesting fact about the tongue. is every taste bud on our tongue has somewhere between 50 and 100 taste-sensing cells. You know, you think about how the closer we look at things, there's more and more and more as you dig deeper. You know, we look at a cell and we think of a human cell, and then you can go way down to just on the molecular structure. When you start analyzing things, they're like little universes within a universe. So we think about the vast universe we live in. To me, these things prove a creator when we look at these things. How could something, just this member like the tongue, how could that just evolve for people who think of evolution? This was all intelligent design. So just some interesting facts about the tongue. And I thought it was interesting that when you look up the word tongue in the Bible, you'll find it in the King James Bible 129 times, the word tongue. There are different words for tongue used in the Bible. The first time it's used in the Bible, where do you think that is? Any guesses? The word tongue, not in any specific sense, but where would you think it was used first? Let's turn to Genesis. Yeah, we got to go to Genesis. It's amazing how everything begins there, isn't it? Genesis chapter 10. This is the first time the King James Bible uses the word tongue. Now, in my Bible, the New King James, it doesn't use the word tongue here. It uses a different word, but I'm going to read it to you from here, and then you'll figure out very quickly where the word tongue would be. Chapter 10 of Genesis, verse 5, it says, "From these, the coastland, peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands, every one according to his language." The King James says tongue there, according to their families and to their nations. And as you read through this, you'll find that this is giving us a breakdown of different languages that were used. Now, some people will look at this, in the next chapter it talks about the languages being confused in Nimrod's day. But remember, Genesis, much like Revelation, will move forward and give you a little bit and then go back and cover it again. And that's what was taking place here. The languages weren't confused until the next chapter at the Tower of Babel, if you take notice. But you'll notice that all of these different languages were spoken. There was a lot of different things. And that's the first time you'll find the word tongue. Now, the next time that you'll find it is found in Exodus chapter 4. I'd like you to turn there. Very next book of the Bible, Exodus chapter 4, and verse 10. And you'll notice here, it says, "Then Moses said to Jehovah," Exodus 4:10, "O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither before you, nor since you have spoken to your servant. But I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." And it's interesting if you do a little check on this. You read, there's a marginal note in some Bibles. I don't know if any of you had this, but some will say, "I'm not a man of words," in the marginal note. Mine doesn't have that, but in doing a study, I found that some Bibles use that. Moses was saying, "I'm not a man of words." And some people think, well, that means that he wasn't eloquent, or maybe he wasn't a good speaker. But it's interesting that the thought is, especially when you think about what the Jewish tradition teaches, that he may have had a speech impediment. He may not have been able to speak very well because something was keeping him from speaking. It might have been just the use of his tongue. And why am I bringing this out? Well, you'll see as we go through this. It's pretty interesting. But Moses had difficulty, according to Jewish tradition, he had difficulty with the labial sounds. Have you ever heard of that? Labial sounds? And they come from a consonants like the letter B or V or M or the PH, which gives you the F sound in the English language. He also had problems with the letter P and TH. So any word that would use either the teeth and the tongue or the lips, the teeth and the tongue at the same time, like when we say the, we're using our teeth, right? Or if I say fat, I'm using my lips and my teeth. He had a problem with that according to Jewish tradition. He had a problems with those, so likely it was a speech impediment according to what the Jews understand and know, and based on how it reads in the Hebrew. And I thought that was pretty interesting. There are some that will say, well, he just couldn't quip very good. He didn't have a good comeback. He wasn't a fast thinker. But no, when Moses said that I'm slow of tongue, he was saying, according to what we understand, I just don't speak well. Perhaps you shouldn't use me. But God used Moses in a mighty way. Never worry about how you speak. Maybe I don't choose the right words sometimes. But the beauty of it is that even if I'm speaking to someone, God can make it sound the way it needs to sound to the person listening. It's a beautiful thing. It really is. Now the book of Psalms, if you turn there, I'd like you to turn to the 5th Psalm. The book of Psalms, it actually uses the word tongue 30 times. The 5th Psalm and verse 9. Now, we'll just look at a few of these verses. You'll find some interesting ways it uses the word tongue. Psalm 5, verse 9, it says, "For there is no faithfulness in their mouth. Their inward part is destruction. Their throat is an open tomb. They flatter with their tongue." So this is a negative use of the word tongue. Look at chapter 10, verse 7. It says, "His mouth is full of cursing and deceit and oppression. Under his tongue is trouble and iniquity," or we could say sin. The 12th Psalm, you're probably real close there. It might be on the same page. Psalm 12. Look at verses 1 through 12. It says, "Help, Jehovah, for the godly man ceases, for the faithful disappear from among the from among the sons of men. They speak idly, everyone with his neighbor, with flattering lips and a double heart they speak." A double heart. What's that mean? Good and bad from the same person. In other words, maybe two personalities. Maybe a double life. I show myself one way here, and when I'm somewhere else, I live a different way. Keep going here. Notice verse 3. It says, "May Jehovah cut off all flattering lips and the tongue that speaks proud things. Who have said with our tongue, we will prevail. Our lips are our own. Who is Lord over us? For the oppression of the poor, for the sighing of the needy, now I will arise, says Jehovah. I will set him in the safety for which he yearns." The words of Jehovah are pure words, like silver tried in a furnace of earth, purified 7 times. You shall keep them, O Jehovah. You shall preserve them from this generation forever. The wicked prowl on every side when violence is exalted among the sons of men. So we see, using our tongue, we can use it for good or for bad. How are we using it? When we're preaching the gospel, that's a good way. That's a good way to do it, especially when we're preaching the true gospel. There are people who have a gospel, but it's not necessarily the true gospel. I want you to notice Psalm 34. We're just going to look at a couple more here, and then we'll move on to another book that really will help us to have an understanding of this untamable tongue. Psalm 34, and in verse 13, it says, "Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit." In today's world, that's harder and harder and harder to do. It really is. Jay and I were talking just a little while ago, and he said that somebody had posted something on one of his pages, and he said, I don't need to see that kind of stuff. I'm just going to remove it. And really, we have a tongue called a keyboard, don't we? Think about that. We hide behind a keyboard. We hide behind a computer screen, and we can send venomous things through texts, through emails. While that's not using our tongue, it's things that we're saying, isn't it? So those things that we text and type and do in that manner, it's as if we're saying it. Because if we were there, would we say it or not? Let's look at the tongue in a very positive way. In Psalm 35, again, verse 28, it says, "And my tongue shall speak of your righteousness and of your praise all day long." That's beautiful. The 119th Psalm, Psalm 119. These are all songs that were written, songs of praise. Psalm 119, verse 172. A lot of verses in Psalm 119. It says, "My tongue shall speak of your word, for all your commandments are righteousness." So speaking of the word of God, teaching the commandments of God. The tongue here in Psalm 120, look at verses 2 and 3. It speaks of a lying tongue. It says, "Oh, deliver my soul," Psalm 120, verse 2, "O Jehovah, from lying lips and from a deceitful tongue." Deliver me from that. What shall be given to you, or what shall be done to you, you false tongue? So, and this is somewhere where it's really easy to fall into the trap of, well, I'll just tell a little white lie. Let me just embellish the truth just a little bit, just to make me look better. That's easy. It's easy to do. But we shouldn't even go there. We shouldn't even go there. And then this is the one that I need to read for myself. Psalm 137, verse 6. It says, "If I do not remember you, let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. Or if I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chief joy." So when it says that your tongue should cling to the roof of your mouth, it means I need to shut up. Right? If my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth, I can't say anything. And I need to apply that to myself, because sometimes I want to say something and things just, if there's ever something that I want to say and I feel compelled to say it just because I'm trying to fill dead time, what happens? I usually say something really stupid. So I try to remember that verse, "Let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth." Now let's go to the New Testament and look at some things that James had to say about the tongue. He had some very powerful words here. And, this applies, I tell you what, the closer we get to the return of Jesus, the more my patience has tried. I don't know about you, but I'm terrible especially when I'm behind the wheel of a car and somebody cuts in front of me or slows me down, or I'm in a hurry, or I'm trying to go through the grocery store line and I'm standing there and I go to the express line and the person in front of me has 40 items and it says 12 items or less. That's frustrating. And the bad side of me sometimes will show. And I've really, I've heard some sermons that Rick has given, and Ed and I have talked, and I think all of us have had this conversation. It's harder and harder and harder in this world to be Christ-like. It really is difficult. But the closer we come to Christ and we have the Spirit of Christ in us, the easier it can be. And so when we look through this text, let's do a self-examination, and this is what I had to do. Look at James chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. He says, "My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment." So what's that saying about those who are, whether we're teaching Sabbath school, whether we're preaching from here, whether we are commenting in Sabbath school, whether we're preaching to somebody, our neighbor, we're witnessing to them? When we become a teacher of God's word, we're held to a higher accountability. We should take that really seriously. Verse 2, "For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body." Anybody ever been around a horse with a bit? They don't like that. It's very uncomfortable for them. They try to get it out. But just by pulling on that reins a little bit, or by moving it to the left or right, you can guide that horse, make it stop. A big horse, 1,000-pound horse, you can control with that little tiny 8-ounce or less bit in his mouth. It's amazing. And James realizes that. And that's why he said we put these bits in their mouths that they obey us. And we make that 1,000-pound horse move the way we want them to. But notice what he says. "Look also at ships." Have you seen the size of today's ships? They're huge. Some of them are 220,000 tons. How does something like that even float? But it says here, as we look at verse 4, look also at ships, although they are so large and are driven by force winds," that's talking about sailboats in his day, "they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires." And the same goes today. The new ships run on a similar operation. The rudder, though, has a prop on it. They're not driven by wind these days. And that prop, whichever way that turns, that little tiny prop takes that whole vessel and changes direction and pushes it any way it wants it to go. Into the wind, away from the wind, into the waves, away from... It doesn't matter. It goes where it's directed. So look at the analogy that he draws here. After he talks about the bit in the horse's mouth and the rudder from the ship, he says in verse 5, "Even so the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles?" Some of the biggest disasters we've had in forest fires have been started from one little spark or one little flame in one spot. And they burn tens of thousands of acres. And that's what he's saying here. The tongue can be like that little tiny flame. Even though it's so small, it can start a fire that maybe you can't put out. Look at verse 6. "And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind." We can tame lions and dogs and bears. We go to the zoo and we see tame animals sometimes, right? We've domesticated animals. If you've ever been to the circus, they have lions that are tamed. He says, verse 8, "But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison." Wow. Verse 9, "With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God." Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. Now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Wow, that's beautiful. But how do we get there? How do I get there from here? I'm standing in line at the grocery store, and that person gets in front of me with 40 items, and I've got just 2. And I'm in a hurry. I've got somewhere I need to be. I want to say, "Hey, see the sign?" I mean, that's my inclination. That's my personality. That's who I am. Can't you read? How do we overcome that? Friends, it all boils down to what's in here. And when I get in that line and I see that person, there are people that can't read. How do I know that that person in front of me is somebody that doesn't know what that sign says? I don't. I just automatically assume, "Hey, can't you read?" Well, he might turn around and say, "Well, as a matter of fact, no, I can't." Boy, wouldn't I feel like an idiot? I would. I'd be a total fool. And I did have a friend one time. He said something, and somebody walked in front of him, and he said, "Hey." And then he tapped him on the shoulder, and the guy turned around and he said, "What, are you deaf?" He was. It was really embarrassing. It was really embarrassing. So think about, what kind of a witness am I giving if this comes out of my mouth, if I'm standing in line? Maybe that person, there were so many people at the other one, and maybe they've got an emergency and somebody's waiting for them to come through the store, and maybe they got a phone call. and they've got to get through the line real fast. We don't know. So let's not read into things. That's what I'm trying to learn this for myself. Be patient. Sitting at the light. This morning, I came this morning to the church, and I wanted to bring my guitar. And I got here, and Ed and I were talking. I said, it's 5 after 9. I said, oh, I forgot my guitar. I've got to go home and get it. Well, wouldn't you know it, that I got behind every slowpoke, everybody that was going slow. I mean, I'm driving along, I'm thinking, at least do the speed limit. And I thought, wow, this is exactly what my sermon's about. I want to be talking about me. And that's what it was. The light turns green, and I'm thinking my reaction time. Come on, get on the gas. Get on the gas. It seemed like it took the guy 10 seconds to push the throttle. But, if I wasn't in a hurry, it was just a normal acceleration. But because I was only thinking of myself, I could turn that around and say, no, I was thinking of others because I want to be there on time for when the Bible study starts, because it would be disrespectful for me to be. But that's not the reason. Let's be honest with one another. It all boils down to what's in our heart. In Matthew chapter 12, Jesus said to the Pharisees, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So this is what drives this. Right? What's in here is what drives what's in here. I want you to look at James chapter 1 with me. James chapter 1. And notice verse 21. It says here, therefore, lay aside all filthiness and overflow of wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. The implanted word, what does that mean, implanted? If I have an implant in my mouth, what does that mean? It's part of it. The implanted word means that we make it a part of us. And then it says in verse, let's see, where was I there? Overflow. Where did I stop? I lost my place. 21. Yes, the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. Verse 22, but be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. We do what we read in the word. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man observing his natural face in a mirror. For he observes himself, he goes away, and immediately he forgets what kind of man he was. But he who looks into the perfect law of liberty, we're talking about the law of God, the perfect law of liberty. He who looks into the perfect law of liberty and continues in it, and is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this one will be blessed in what he does. If anyone among you thinks he is religious, and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is useless. So by the things that I say when I'm in the grocery store behind that person, the way that I react, or the things that I holler out my window to that guy in front of me, that's a reflection on who I am and the God that I claim to represent. Isn't that true? And then when people see me, pushing them down the road in my car, and I turn into the church parking lot, I'm representing this ministry the way this is saying. It says, if we do not bridle our tongue, but we deceive our own heart, our religion is useless. Verse 27, pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. That means that nothing that I do should look like anything that the world considers to be normal. What does the world consider to be normal today? It's horrible. It's horrible. Now, you notice there too, it says visit orphans. So James is saying that how we treat children is very important. How we treat widows is very important in their trouble. You see, looking into that mirror, remember the illustration that I gave, and I've given it many times, about looking in the mirror reveals the smudge on my face. Ed asked me to share that this morning in Sabbath school. It reveals the smudge on my face, but it doesn't remove the smudge. What is it that removes the smudge? Christ in my heart. I need something to take it away. I need that. I'd like you to turn with me to 2 Corinthians chapter 5. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And I hope this makes sense to you, friends, because, when I do a sermon like this is all week long. I was thinking about this sermon, and the reason I'm using the illustrations I'm using is because this was basically how I felt when I was in the grocery store, when I'm driving down the road, and when I'm dealing with situations during the day. And so it calls for self-examination. I have thoughts I shouldn't have. I think things I shouldn't be thinking. It says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new." You see, this whole part of the chapter here is about being reconciled to God. What gets me back to being a godly person? What gets my relationship with God the way it should be? And if my relationship is with God the way it is supposed to be, how's it going to be with fellow man? It's going to have to be. It's a reflection. How I treat people is a reflection on what I think of the God that I worship. It's just the truth. That's the truth of the matter. So, is the tongue untamable? I called this sermon the Untamable Tongue. Is it untamable? In my own power, it is. It's impossible for me to tame my tongue because my nature is sinful. My natural inclination is to do things according to what I want to be done. But I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 19. Matthew chapter 19. Remember, I said that my tongue is untamable in myself. But when I look at Matthew chapter 19, look at verse 26. Well, actually, let's back up. If you remember here, Jesus is talking to the disciples, and they ask him if a rich man could enter into the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus says in verse 23, "Assuredly I say to you, it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And again I say to you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God." And when the disciples heard it, they were astonished greatly, saying, "Who then can be saved?" In other words, they're saying, that's impossible. There's no way that a camel can go through the eye of a needle. And you've heard me say this before. I'm going to say it again for those online and some of you that are here. There are people who will spiritualize this and say, well, the eye of a needle was a little hole in the wall in Jerusalem that a camel had to get down on his knees and crawl through. But no, the connotation here is the eye of a sewing needle when you look at it in the Greek. And look at what Jesus says in verse 26. Is it possible for the camel to go through an eye of a sewing needle? You and I would say, nope, that's impossible. But Jesus looked at them and said to them in verse 26, with men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. So we say the untamable tongue. Is it impossible? Not with God. If we allow Christ in our hearts, if we allow that new heart to be put in us that Jeremiah talked about, that Ezekiel talked about, the true gospel, if we truly allow the Spirit of Christ into us, our tongue can be tamed. We can be changed into a new person. We can be perfected before Christ comes, but not in our own power. It's in the power that Christ gives us. Job walked with God. He was called perfect before God. Never sinned with his lips. I wish I could say that about myself. How did he have control of his tongue? It says that in all of these things that happened to Job, he did not sin with his lips. He didn't say anything that was against God. And when I condemn my neighbor and I say things about them that are wicked and evil or disparaging, I don't know the heart of that person. I don't know the motive of that person. I don't know why they were in that line of 12 items or less. You can see it bothered me. It bothered me because I was thinking the very things I shouldn't be. And I don't want to be that person. So I'm going to ask you all to pray for me that I can overcome these things, because I think that these are the things that can separate us from God. If we hold on to those things that really press our buttons. So that's going to be one of my requests, that my personality can change to be more like the personality of Christ. That's the only way we're going to make it, friends. The untamable tongue, is it untamable? Not with God. Because with God, all things are possible.